fans to a very special OneSoccer YouTube Hangout session, one that I'm very excited to be hosting. I'm Asa Raymond, joined by OneSoccer analyst and a regular on these Hangouts, Oliver Platts. And if you're a fan of soccer stories, there's a good chance you're familiar with our guest today. He's written for The Guardian, The Athletic, The 42, executive producer and star of the sports doc film Celtic Soul, featuring Jay Baruchel. And I had the honor of sharing the anchor desk with him as host of the Fox Soccer Report for a couple of years. He's my good friend, Eoin O'Callaghan. Eoin, thank you and welcome.
The pressure's on after an introduction like that. I hope I don't fail. Goodness me, can only go downhill after this.
Yeah, you're going to be great. I'm looking forward to this. Since we're all based in Toronto, happy Phase 2 day. Does anything change?
That's right.
Are you adventure seekers? Are you going to be going out to the mall?
I think I'm going to be putting a booking in with my barber pretty soon. That's probably the first one on the agenda for me. I don't know. I haven't actually looked at the full list of what I'm allowed to do now, so maybe you guys can fill me in here.
Am I still allowed to go to the Corktown Common and feed the ducks? I was shocked the other day. I do this thing where I go with my wife to feed the ducks, and then there's a notice being put up to say, please do not feed the animals in here. And we're like, did someone see us and like report us?
Yeah,
and
that's directed at you.
We have resulted in notices being put up. Like, I thought it was a really nice thing to do to feed the ducks, like give them some bread. Obviously not. Maybe you've contributed to some sort of lack of ducks in the East Toronto downtown core. So to anyone out there who is, an eco warrior or anything like that, I apologize for my duck feeding.
Well, when you have other options now, you can get a haircut, you can have a drink on a patio. So there are other things you can do. Yeah, you can get into a mall. Apparently now,
Listen,
not all this stuff.
We're back to normal, aren't we? Really, it's just like things were. I mean, come on.
It's just it. Yeah, back to normal, and matches are back as well. Didn't mention in the intro that you have a new book coming out, Eoin, in August on the early life of Roy Keane, and lo and behold, that's where we start our discussions today. It's as though someone planned this out. Your book comes out in just a couple of months, and Roy Keane made headlines over the weekend after his halftime rant during the halftime show of the match between Manchester United and Tottenham. Keane called out United defender Harry Maguire and keeper David De Gea for allowing Steven Bergwijn's goal in the first half. Eoin, as someone who studied Roy Keane, how would you describe his rant?
I kind of find it funny that it's being described as a rant to begin with. Roy has a lot, obviously a previous, but he's certainly got better stuff in his arsenal than that. It was pretty timid, really, in the pantheon of Keane verbal volleys. I think that there's a lot, anytime you talk about Roy Keane, there's so many layers to it, and you have to contextualize things. I think that arguably Roy Keane is at his happiest when he's in the Phoenix studio these days, because he's given a degree of freedom that he would never have as a manager. And I think if he ever wanted to go down that road of management again, which doesn't seem likely really, you have to conform to the rules of the industry. You have to play the games, and you have to go to the right meetings, and you have to rub shoulders with the right people. You have to deal with lots of people that aren't very nice, agents that aren't very nice. You have to kind of play the game and give them the platitudes they want. You have to treat players in a certain way now, in a more cerebral way, more sensitive way, more thoughtful way. And by following all these rules and regulations, I don't think it really conforms to the persona that Roy Keane has ever had. He's very much his own person. He does things in his own way. And he's certainly not a person who will ever want to be at the beck and call of various executives in the boardroom in terms of, what have you got us into today? Now we have to send out this apology on social media for something you said. Keane just likes unconditional support. And in something like the Sky Sports environment, he can go in there and he can give both barrels, and people obviously have always either loved him or hated him. And he's perfect for TV in that context. Not everybody can be analytical. Not everybody can get the X's and O's out and talk about expected goals. And there's a place for that. But I think there's also a place for Roy Keane, because you have to think of the viewership of Sky Sports. It's not everybody who's going to be watching who's into statistics and analytics and data. A lot of people are watching from the comfort of their living room or comfort of the pub, and they want to be they want to hear Roy Keane say this stuff. They want to have that sort of entertainment and have a bit of enjoyment rather than something that maybe could be cogent and very intelligent and very enthralling and captivating in its own way, but possibly a little bit alienating to a lot of audience members. So I think there's a fascination with the latter part of Roy Keane's years for a lot of people. I think the media are still a little bit baffled by him. He's a journalist's kind of dream and nightmare because on one hand, he's an enigma that's never been solved, and journalists are desperate to solve that enigma. They really want to get in behind him, what makes him tick, why he says the things he does. And ultimately, from doing this book and spending so much time analysing him, I don't think he's as complicated as a lot of people think he is. And I think that's a real problem. They want him to have this dark passenger on his shoulder. They want him to maybe struggle with mental health issues or have this darkness about him. I don't think he does. I don't think he ever does that. I don't think it's ever been a part of his life. I don't think, really, I think he's been the same guy since he's been about 16 in terms of the way he sees the world, in terms of the moral compass, in terms of the way he does things, the way he says things, the arguments he has. And the person that we saw in the Sky Sports studio is the same guy who had his infamous NUTV rant that ended up in him being sacked by Manchester United. Yeah. There's not much difference. The way he talks about Harry Maguire and David Hay is basically the same way he talked about Darren Fletcher and Rio Ferdinand. So there's you can't really talk about him as a maverick when he was a player and now have a problem with him as a pundit in terms of what he was saying. He's basically always been the same way, and he's always been unapologetic for that as well.
Well, I find him highly entertaining. I know Ollie has some questions about the book, so I'll let him take it from here.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to say, like, it's not anything new what he did at the weekend in terms of, having that kind of blunt and very honest opinion. Do you think Keane is someone, do you think he's maybe playing up to that persona and to the expectation that maybe fans have of him now, or is he just not really capable of being anything other than completely honest in his views?
I think there's definitely a part of him that is increasingly aware of how the media landscape works. And, I do think that he understands now that he will become a meme or he will become a viral video. But I don't think he really cares too much about that, because I think ultimately he will always come back to, well, is what I'm saying not the truth? Show me someone who disagrees. And, it's interesting that watching that game and you watch David De Gea slip up on a goal, I'm sure that everyone in the studio has the exact same reaction Keane does. It's like, hands to the face. Can't believe De Gea's missed that. It should be pushed outside the post. It should be a very comfortable save for him. When the cameras are rolling, Keane still reacts that way. Maybe the other people around him in studio are a little bit more careful, a little bit more sensitive in how they approach it. But again, it comes back to Keane's personality. He's never really been the person who's going to beat around the bush and maybe to a fault, not think too much about other people's feelings because he's so comfortable in his own perspective. Maybe that's what cost him as a player. Maybe that's certainly what cost him as a manager, where you have to be responsible for your actions and how it makes other people feel. It can't just be about players. It might also be a reflection of how you go about things. So I do think he's increasingly aware. I mean, Keane has also got involved in live events. He's also got involved in being in front of crowds. So as much as people, have always said, oh, he's becoming the thing that he always said he wouldn't, which is a mouth for hire. I think he's also tapped into sort of a larger scale of that, where he'll do is, it's not after dinner speaking circuit, but he will fill out theatres in Ireland and the UK, and he'll regale the crowd with stories about long ago and what Cantona was like, and this funny anecdote about Paul Ince. So he has, whether or not he wants to admit to it, he has become part of the football industry in probably a way that he never wanted to, never probably understood it. But I think he's probably come around to the fact that A, it pays the bills, B, it keeps him part of the football industry, and C, when there are no managerial doors open for him, this is a nice way for him to keep himself in the public sphere a little bit.
Yeah, just one more from me on the book. Does he know you're writing this? Have you had any contact with him? Because I was just wondering, because I imagine he's quite a frightening subject to be writing about in terms of how he might respond, I guess. He might know about it. Not as if you pick up a phone and say, "Hi Roy, it's Owen. Listen, I'm writing a book about you. Cool." Right.
But there are obviously a lot of interviews that I conducted throughout the book with people who he knows, I am sure that football is a pretty small industry. I'm sure the word has maybe filtered through to him that a book is in the works. But a lot of these people are not in his orbit really anymore. I mean, because the book is centered on that era of 1988 to 1993, and it culminates in him signing for Manchester United, you're kind of going back 30 years. So, you know, as much as he may be in relative contact with some of those people, it's not as if he sees them every day. It's not as if he sees them every week or every month. But it is funny. I mean, you're reaching out to a couple of people who would have been, I guess, high-profile teammates of his at the time, and they're still very wary of speaking about him, which was a very interesting thing. You think it's 3 decades ago. You know, firstly, what are you going to tell me that's going to be extremely sort of, terrifying for Roy Keane that this piece of information is finally going to be out there about me? And secondly, it's a long time ago, but still, they're very careful. That's not necessarily a bad thing for a writer, because it opens up people who were around him at a time who haven't really been given an opportunity to talk about him. You have a lot of high profile guys. Keane is one of those guys who everyone has a story about. Yeah. So when you are talking with a Stuart Pearce or a Nigel Clough or whoever it is, they've probably said all they're ever going to say about Keane, because they've probably got about 8 or 9 stories and they've probably told them all already. And so for the purposes of a book, you wanted as much fresh material as possible to mine from. But it was an interesting thing. You're looking at Keane, who was a young man at Nottingham Forest. You know, he was 19 when he signed for that club, but still the influence that he carries within this sort of football community 30 years on is still pretty sufficient.
Well, some players aren't as shy about talking about Roy Keane and incidents and run-ins that they've had with Roy Keane in the past, and particularly Darren Bent recently coming out telling TalkSport that he is still traumatized by events that he experienced while at Aston Villa. Does that surprise you? Did you come across any of those stories, or does it surprise you to hear that these stories are coming out now?
Like, traumatized? Like, really? You know, I mean, I'm sure your teammates have done stuff to you that were a lot more traumatized. I'll put it that way, right? I mean, like, Keane has a mouth on him, and he's always had a mouth on him, and it can be withering, and it can be nasty, but Keane's also kind of got a moral compass, and he's always had this. He's always going to be, I'm not going to put him in sort of like the pantheon of like sort of the Dexter Morgan sort of sociopath, like, oh, I killed, but for the right reasons. It's not to that level of kind of, you know, perversion, but if you go through his hit list of misdemeanors down through the years, it's not as if one day he decides to, you know, go in hard on Alfie Haaland, right? Like, the Alfie Haaland incident was a result of something that happened Keane beforehand, a traumatic incident that happened Keane. So Keane seeks retribution. It's not very smart to seek retribution with anything, but it does come from the place of Keane wanting to right or wrong, something that happened to him, and he wants to take control of that situation back. And in much the same way that if he said something to Darren Bent, you know, it comes from a place of, look, I think that you're this type of striker, I think you're this type of player, but at the moment you're not showing it. And I may not put my arm around you and tell you in that way, and sit down with you and break bread and have a glass of wine with you and say, you know, let's talk about your feelings. I'm Roy Keane. I'm going to shout at you, and I'm going to roar at you, and I'm going to motivate you that way. It's really old school, and it's certainly not the way that it is anymore. You have to be a little bit more thoughtful in your approach. But in terms of like saying stuff like you're traumatized, like, firstly, what you do talking about Roy Keane, right? Like, you've got one story about how Roy Keane wronged you. Like, I mean, does that mean that Roy Keane's a bad guy or something? Like, is that an isolated incident? Well, we don't know, because you just tell one story. There are numerous stories about Roy Keane where he's just a nice person. You know, he's been involved in football for a long time, and Darren Bent's got one story about the time, like, Roy Keane said something mean to him. Like, you know, you think back to your school days. You're in school for 14 years of your life. There's probably there's probably the likelihood of someone having one bad story about it, even though you're like, I'm a nice guy. Like, you picked one moment where I did something bad. But obviously it fits a narrative, right? People want to jump on this thing about Roy Keane being a maniac and being crazy. And you're like, he's not really that bad, to be honest. I mean, like, even in writing the book and at Nottingham Forest as a young player, there's all of these stories about him and the scrapes that he got involved in, and he's this and he's that. And you look at the stories, you think, is that it? Is that really as bad as it is? Like, there's guys who've done a lot worse. You're thinking of Roy Keane in an era where racism was incredibly prevalent. Guys who are being unsupportive teammates. If you want to really dig into all those stories and the era that Keane was a player in and a coaching, there's a lot of really dark stuff and heavy stuff that's gone on. The fact that Keane, said something that Darren Bent took, took on in a certain way, like, is that it? It makes a headline, and Keane is always a headline, right? Keane's very sellable. There's so many YouTube videos of like, Roy Keane, hilarious story from Jason McAteer. And you're like, I don't, like, really, Keane stories is an industry in itself almost. Again, it's that after dinner speaking thing of, the crowd want to hear your story about how loopy Roy Keane is. And a lot of people do it. Like Jason McAteer has a story about the 1994 World Cup about being a teammate of Keane's with the Republic of Ireland. And he went on a primetime TV Friday night. The longest running chat show in the world in Ireland is a show called The Late Late Show. He goes on this show and he's asked about, you played with Roy, wasn't he a bit crazy? And Jason McAteer tells this story about the game against Norway, a group stage game that ended scoreless. And he just makes the story up. It's just so wrong. Like, factually, it's all over the place, but the crowd can't get enough of it. I mean, the actual stories about how loopy Roy is, and the crowd are lapping it up, and it's just made it up. It's just a fabrication, and all you do is you go on a photo archive, and you're thinking all these details that McAteer has. Like, none of this adds up. Like, none of it, but nobody challenges it, right? Because it's a story about Roy, and it kind of brings that narrative forward, and it helps fuel that sort of perspective that people have on him. Now, with that being said, I don't exactly want to come across as a massive flag waver for Keane either. He's done stuff that's been terrible and reprehensible, and he should be held accountable for it. But in the pantheon of the story of Roy Keane, I think his outburst or hysteria about David De Gea and Harry Maguire, I think, is relatively timid by Roy's standards.
Well, you're still in the book, Owen. Look forward to reading it in a couple of months' time. Let's turn our attention now to the current squad, the current situation with Manchester United. Big match in about 10 minutes now. Manchester United against Sheffield United, and big match as far as implications go in their quest for a top 4, top 5 finish. How do you see things playing out for Manchester United over the next few games?
It's a weird place, isn't it, Manchester United at the moment? It's a strange environment, and like, it's obviously a deeply transitional period, but there's only so many times you can talk about transitions, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where you need to see something up close.
Well, that's just it. Owen, do they need to have this top 5, top 4 finish to validate this season?
Well, I guess for Manchester United standards right now, of course. I mean, you can't be usurped by Sheffield United in the league, right? I mean, that's you have the danger of becoming that, and I think that's the biggest thing about, not to bring it back to Keane, but I'm sure it irritates him and frustrates him that he's in the studio watching this club that he played for so long and he was a captain of, and it was their prime time, it was their big moment, it was their purple patch, it was the most successful period in the club's history, and here's what's left. It's this kind of, it's like someone's taking a mask off. It just does not bear any resemblance to what went before. And we talk about personalities, and we talk about the Harry Maguires and David De Gea's, and obviously I'm sure when Roy Keane is in the studio and commenting and providing analysis on that, his mind goes back to Peter Schmeichel, and if Schmeichel made a mistake to that level, he would expect to be held to account. He would expect to walk into a dressing room and have personalities stand there in his face and just let him know and have that reminder of the club that he plays for, what it means to make a mistake at that level. And you have to wonder, I guess it's more of a reflection of football generally. I don't think that those sorts of environments exist anymore. And I think in United's case, it's strange. I mean, watching United over the last few years, I think there's just been a disconnect. I struggle seeing certain players play for that club where you're thinking, this is just not a good fit. I was excited with Bruno Fernandes' arrival, I have to say. And obviously there's this sort of thought with him and Pogba. And maybe this could be what Manchester United needs, and this partnership and these two guys are creative and finally can gel together. So you're excited. Obviously, I think two of them are starting something, and you're excited to see maybe what can come from that, and maybe that could be a catalyst, and maybe that can be a turning point. And then you might fast forward in a few months, and Pogba decides he wants to go, and you start all over again. So it's difficult. It's strange. Like, I think, Ole Solskjaer certainly has needed the support and has needed time to properly embed himself in there. But you're also looking at, I think somebody said when Solskjaer took over this, if basically here's Manchester United as an entity, as an organization, you could probably put anyone in there a la Solskjaer, and they do an okay job. They get to an okay level of Manchester United. Right. So I think there's also pressure on Solskjaer as well, that he's been given a bit of time and he's been given a little bit of a bedding in period. But ultimately, you have to back that up. You can't just continue to make excuses. And particularly if there is a high-profile departure like Pogba, or if Pogba continues to be this enigmatic guy you can't bring the best out of, you still have these problems kind of emerging. And like you take a fixture like today, it's Manchester United, Sheffield United. That should be a handy win for United, right? I mean, that's just something that you just take for granted, and it's not. You kind of can't really take anything for granted with Manchester United anymore. And I guess that's arguably the greatest reflection of where United are as a club. Before, you could, even with Jose in charge and stuff like that, there's certain fixtures you think, yeah, okay, United are okay. But now, it's like Stranger Things. We're it's like stepping into the other side.
The upside down, yeah.
And the upside down a little bit. And that's kind of where I see it. It's like you're on unsecure and unstable ground with United. There's always an opportunity for some, for you to, if you're walking down the stairs, for one of those steps to just fall through and you stumble again. And I think there's still plenty of work to do there before they get back to anything resembling a sort of a progressive heel.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because I think the Premier League is at least while Klopp and Guardiola are still around, it's as hard to win as it has ever been in the history of the league, in my opinion. And you see that with, the points totals those teams are putting up, and even Liverpool finishing second with one of the best seasons in Premier League history, right? So I just think, where the analysis of someone like Keane falls down a little bit is that he kind of thinks back to his day and leans on things like, accountability in the dressing room and winning your one-on-one battle and things like that. And I think football has moved beyond that now, right? So United have got to find a way. For me, the biggest challenge they face is finding a way to give a manager the time to really build a team. And I think Solskjaer has done some good things here in terms of building around players like Rashford and Wan-Bissaka and Bruno Fernandes and players like that. But he's got to have the time to put a team together that can really get to that level of competing with Liverpool and City. And it took Guardiola a year. It took Klopp more than a year. That doesn't happen overnight. So, as you say, kind of resisting that pressure of, potentially losing a game to a team like Sheffield United and people saying that's not acceptable for Manchester United, but then still giving someone, the year, 18 months that it's going to take to really build a top Premier League team. That's a really difficult thing to do.
And I think, Ollie, as well, you make an interesting point. I think there is that huge problem when you have an entity, an organisation like Manchester United is so deeply historical that you have to park the history.
Yeah.
And you have to, that there is the separation between what happened before and what will happen in the future, because there needs to be that differentiation, and that's difficult in itself, because all of those ex-players are people that you watch on TV now who are providing analysis, or they're employed by their own club, and I think that's to try to turn the page. And United have gone through that before in their own history, right? You've got managers who came in and they had to try to find a way of doing it themselves, and people being okay with that. It's like people are very much, on the side of change until it happens, and it's not the change that they wanted. Mm-hmm. And there's, United need to be okay with maybe doing things in a different way than before. And it's it's an interesting phase after any sort of dynasty, right? Like with any team, you have a person who's coming in next and saying, we need to move on. But you can never really say that. You have to honor the history, you have to honor the culture, you have to honor the identity, you have to say, you give all those platitudes. And even Solskjaer, when he first came into that job, the shadow of Ferguson and those days working with him and that influence, he talked about that a lot, to the point where you're thinking, you kind of need to stop talking about that now. And you need to carve out that own sort of process for yourself and figure it out for yourself. And I think certainly over the last few months, that's become less and less. So Solskjaer might be now in a stage where he is figuring it out on his own terms, which I think hopefully in the long run, in the short to medium term, is a good thing for United as well.
Well, one player, sorry guys, just to move things on a bit here. One player linked to Manchester United as well as several other teams is Canadian Jonathan David. Recent reports indicate that Borussia Mönchengladbach have reportedly made an offer for Jonathan David of 25 million euros. Ghent, his current club, is said to be holding out for a fee of 30 to 35 million. He's got 18 goals in 27 appearances with his club. Where would you like to see him end up, Owen? What would be a good fit for Jonathan David?
Well, I was having a couple of conversations yesterday with people who are relatively closely linked to, working as a German football, and they said to me that Bayern is not out of the equation for Jonathan David, which I guess might surprise a few people. You kind of think of this and you think, oh, where's he going to blossom the best? Where's he going to be given the most minutes?
The best opportunity for him, sure.
Yeah, most meaningful opportunities as well. It's not like 15 minutes off the bench, whatever. But because it's interesting, you go back to January, and remember January about 5 years ago, when there were reports of 20 million and Ghent wanting 25, and you look at where David was in January, and where he was within a couple of months after that. You think of the Roma game, that performance, standout. I think it's 9 league goals in 2020 for him, his first hat-trick, finishes joint top scorer in the league. So you add all that to the mix, and then you come back to a possible transfer fee, and you come back to the possible teams who have now entered the market in terms of his signature. So that's what I've heard. One thing that could be the situation, I guess, in all honesty, I thought it was what was going to happen to Alphonso Davies, which is you sign for Bayern and they send you on a season-long loan. And, I think that could potentially be something that Bayern would look at. Maybe going to Gladbach for a season, like immediately upon signing. But I think if Gladbach get fourth, and the extra money that comes from that, certainly Gladbach, have an extra slab of cash to work with there in terms of trying to persuade David to come. But yeah, that's what I heard is up to yesterday, that Bayern was still firmly in the mix for him. The fact that he's adaptable, you look at Alphonso Davies at Bayern, and like Hansi Flick is you look at him as a coach. If you're good enough, he'll play you.
Yeah.
And if you can also add to your game a little bit of adaptability, he'll definitely play. So it's an interesting one for Jonathan David, because you've probably got a couple of different scenarios. And do you really push hard for a move to a Bayern, or will you look at a Gladbach and say, I would jump at that chance because of
right.
So it's a really interesting time for him, and it's a really interesting decision. Obviously, brilliant for Canadian football to have such a dilemma facing such a young guy.
Well, Lewandowski doesn't look like he's slowing down at 31 either, right? So that's got to come into mind.
It has, and it's interesting how things have kind of changed, I think, for young players, particularly someone like Jonathan David, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, would probably say, well, where is the most money going to be? Where can I secure myself financially? What's the most prestigious club I can join and get to that highest level as quickly as possible, right? And nowadays, I think, both players and their agents are a lot smarter about it and tend to look a lot more at the footballing fit and think, well, the financial side will take care of itself if I can find the best place for me on the field, right? So I think that's kind of the mentality that David and his agent has taken to it. I think they are looking at the Bundesliga in particular, despite some of the Premier League interest, and they're looking at where he can go and get games. So I wouldn't be surprised if it is a club like Gladbach. I really like the fit at Leipzig. Whether they are interested or not, I don't know. But I think with Timo Werner leaving, there's a really natural fit for him there at a club that has done a very good job of developing players, selling players on, you know, when they do improve. And also, I just think has a style of play in terms of that high intensity, you know, attacking game that would really suit him down to the ground. So I'd love to see that. But yeah, we're picking between a lot of very good options for a kid from, you know, who was playing youth football in Ottawa just a few years ago, right?
So we're all leaning towards the Bundesliga over the Premier League, or would you like to see him, Owen, in the EPL?
I think Bundesliga is a great fit for him. I really do. You know, I think not that you'd fear for him in a Premier League situation, but I just think in terms of the developmental age he's at, you know, the fact that he can use Alphonso Davies as a terrific template. You know, he has nothing to fear. He's already proven himself at a really, really high level in Europe. You know, when immediately when you're being touted around for 25 million, you know, you've done the hard work.
Yeah.
Really, you know, you've put in, you know, so much hard yards at Ghent, and you know, even just, you know, looking recently, like his manager talking about, okay, he's probably the best player I've ever worked with. You know, the kid is still a kid, and that's you know, talking about how there's no limits to him, what he can do with his career, and that's an incredible situation to be in. You know, he's already got, you know, I guess he's already got a really, really decent amount of high-profile games under his belt at a really elite level, maybe unlike Alphonso. You know, where you always can fear, oh, could he make that step up? Well, Jonathan David, he's done okay. You know, in those big juicy fixtures where that you really want to take on when you're a kid, and you're kind of unbeatable. So I think Bundesliga is a great fit for him. I'm just really excited. You know, I'm just really excited at the prospect of seeing another Canadian international, you know, play it at an elite level and to showcase that talent, because that talent exists. And as Ollie pointed out a couple of years ago, you know, you talk of the roots and what the paths that footballers take, and circumstance, good fortune, the right player at the right time. Jonathan David probably a couple of years ago was thinking, how am I ever going to find a pathway here?
Oh, especially playing locally in Ottawa.
Yeah. It's
a wild story.
It's a crazy story, you know. And as much as, you know, Alphonso's story is its own thing and has been well documented and well reported on, you know, Jonathan Davis is almost a more traditional footballing story, right? Like you're in a particular environment, in a particular place at a particular time, probably thinking, how am I ever going to get seen? You know, this is an impossible task in front of me. You fast forward a couple of years and we're talking about Bayern Munich interest, talking about him being voted Young Player of the Year and Player of the Year in a Belgian newspaper just a couple of weeks ago. You know, it's really something. And again, it's a story that's kind of slipped under the radar a little bit. The ascent of Jonathan David, because obviously Alphonso is being front and center all the time. But it's a remarkable thing. And just, again, if you're a Canadian football fan, it's just really, really thrilling. Really, at the prospects of kind of what lies ahead here.
Certainly. Yeah, if not for Davies, I think we'd be celebrating Jonathan David a lot more and touting him a lot more. Just out of time here because Manchester United kicking off now. So, Ollie, any final comments?
No, we were going to get into World Cup qualifying, which we'll save for another show when we have more time. But yeah, perfect. FIFA a meeting tomorrow, and mostly to decide who could host the 2023 Women's World Cup. But they'll also be looking at the men's international match calendar and how they're going to reorganize that around what's obviously happened over the past few months. So hopefully in the next few days, we'll have more clarity as to what Canada's path to Qatar 2022 could look like. Yeah, hoping to get some news on that. Owen, took us way too long to connect professionally like this. We'll have to do it again soon. Hopefully get you in studio whenever we return to studio as well. So thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks, Owen. Owen, I know you're expecting your first child in a few months as well, so I wish you and Lindsay all the best. To everyone who watched, thank you for watching. For Ollie and Owen, thanks. And please subscribe, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. Enjoy the matches today.